Let's talk about types of sentences. We want a variety of sentences when we're writing to keep our reader interested so our writing doesn't sound repetitious and simple. So there are three types of sentences. The first is a simple sentence, one that you've been using since you were first learning how to write. Simple sentence expresses one complete thought. We move on to a compound sentence. The compound sentence has two or more complete thoughts in it. Lastly, we have the complex sentence. The complex sentence has an independent and dependent clause. Let's look at simple sentences in a little more detail. So a simple sentence, as I said before, expresses a complete thought. It makes sense. It can stand on its own. It contains a subject and a predicate. Refresh your memory. The subject is who, what, or where the sentence is about. It's your noun, and any words that describe the noun. And it contains a predicate. The predicate is the action of the sentence and every word that comes with it. Here are two examples. So the first example, we've got Mario and George run around in circles until they get dizzy. That's a complete thought. We're talking about who, Mario and George, that's our subject. What did they do? They run around in circles until they get dizzy. That's the predicate. That makes sense. If I write that on a piece of paper, my reader says, I understand. It's about Mario and George and what they're doing. Our second example is the big green truck raced away from the parking lot. Again, simple sentence contains one complete thought. What is our subject? The big green truck. What did it do? That's the predicate. It raced away from the parking lot. And again, if I write this sentence, my reader understands, I know what's going on in that sentence. It's a complete thought. Moving on, we have compound sentences. They express two or more complete thoughts. Be careful with these. You can put more than two complete thoughts. You don't want to string too many complete thoughts together because then your sentence almost seems to run on, and it's tough for your reader to get a chance to pause and take a breath. So I would stick with two for now. Each thought can stand alone. I could pull those two complete thoughts apart out of my compound sentence, and each one could stand on its own, and my reader would make sense of it. They're combined with a comma and a conjunction. The conjunctions you'll be using are and, but, or so. Do not forget that comma. All right, here's two examples. We can play baseball outside, or we can play video games inside. Notice I underlined the comma and the conjunction just to remind you. Let's cover that up, and let's look at the first part. We can play baseball outside. That's a complete thought. That makes sense. Let's look at the other side of the conjunction. We can play video games inside. That's also a complete thought. This is a compound sentence. Looking at our other example, it was raining heavily, so we stayed inside. Again, I underlined our comma and our conjunction, and we'll look again. Does the first part make sense on its own? It was raining heavily. Yep, it was raining heavily. That makes sense to me. Go to the other side of my conjunction. We stayed inside. Again, a complete thought. Compound sentences must have two complete thoughts to go together, and you always use your comma and one of the conjunctions. And you choose the one that makes sense. Lastly, our complex sentences. This is something in 5th grade we're going to want to be using. We don't want to just depend on our simple and compound. We want to give our writing a little more sophistication. We're getting to be great writers. We want to go ahead and use these skills. So a complex sentence expresses related thoughts. They should go together. One thought can stand alone, and we call that an independent clause, meaning if it's by itself, it makes sense. One thought cannot stand on its own. We call that a dependent clause. And you'll see in my examples in a minute what a dependent clause looks like, but standing on its own, it doesn't make any sense. You're going to use subordinating conjunctions, and I've given a couple examples. There's a long list we could go through. Because, while, since. Sometimes we use a comma, but not always, and I'll explain in the instance. All right. Our first example is going to use a comma. Because Mike had been sick, his mother insisted he skip baseball practice. All right. This is when we use the comma. If our dependent clause comes first in the sentence, we use a comma. And let's see why this one's a dependent clause. Because Mike had been sick. Yeah, tell me more. That can't stand on its own, can it? So because Mike had been sick is a dependent clause. It doesn't make sense on its own. It has to continue with the independent clause. His mother insisted he skip baseball practice. That sentence could stand on its own. His mother insisted he skip baseball practice. That's an independent clause. We only use the comma when we put our dependent clause first. It gives our reader a chance to take a little bit of a pause before they read that complete rest of the sentence. All right, second sentence, you're going to notice our dependent clause comes last, so I'm not going to use a comma this time. Mike was not allowed to play first base since he had missed several practices. All right, let's look at the first part before we get to our conjunction, our subordinating conjunction. Mike was not allowed to play first base. Independent clause, how do I know? It makes sense on its own. I don't need any more explanation about that. Let's look at the second part. Since he had missed several practices. What? Why is that? Why is that not independent? Because it can't stand on its own. It doesn't make sense. But because it comes after the independent clause, I'm not going to use a comma this time. All right, let's see how you do with these. You're going to try now. All right, so let's look at this first sentence. The young piglet was frightened by the noise, so he ran away as quickly as he could. So simple, compound, or complex. Second example, I'm adding extra words in there. I love my teacher because she gives just the right amount of homework. Simple, compound, complex. While I was waiting to see the dentist, I read every magazine in the waiting room. Simple, compound, complex. And the last one, I am going on vacation to the beach, but I will be back in time to start school. Simple, compound, complex. If we look at that first one, if you said compound, you are correct. And hopefully you noticed the comma, the conjunction, and that you looked on each side of the comma and conjunction and saw those thoughts can stand on their own. They're two complete thoughts. The second one, I love my teacher because she gives just the right amount of homework. If you said simple, you've got it. It's expressing one complete thought. We're not putting two complete thoughts together. We're not putting an independent and dependent. We've got no conjunctions in there. So I'm doing okay by saying simple sentence. Next one. While I was waiting to see the dentist, I read every magazine in the waiting room. I'm hoping you said complex for this. All right. Again, we've got our conjunction, our subordinating conjunction, and our comma. And I hope you remember why the comma's there. It's because we had our dependent clause first. While I was waiting to see the dentist, cannot stand on its own. It's not a complete thought. Number 4, I'm going on vacation to the beach, but I will be back in time to start school. If you said compound, you're on the right track. Again, I've got a comma, my conjunction, and two complete thoughts on either side. So hopefully you will work on mastering these 3 types of sentences. I would say you're a master on the simple sentences, but compound, complex, and you're going to put these into your writing to make your writing more varied and interesting for your reader.